What if the creature we call a vampire was never, just a ghost story?
Right. What if it wasn't folklore at all?
Yeah, what if it was a highly evolved, completely predatory branch of Homo sapiens?
It is the ultimate paradigm shift in how we view our own history.
Hmm.
Because we are taught pretty much from day one that humanity conquered the food chain completely alone.
Right. That we just climbed to the top and that was it.
Exactly. But what if we didn't?
So today we are doing a deep dive into something that frankly kept me up all night. We are opening this forensic dossier, essentially, and it suggests that early humanity actually splintered.
Splintered in a very specific, very dangerous way.
Right. We've got this massive archive today. We're looking at suppressed anthropological reports, fringe archaeological data, weird medical anomalies, and it all points toward this terrifying biological reality.
A divergent sibling species, one that adapted specifically to nocturnal hunting.
Yeah. And to blood and fluid consumption and parasitic survival, which is just wild to think about.
It is. And I think we need to set some ground rules for you listening right now. If you're tuning into this deep dive expecting a breakdown of, Gothic fairy tales.
Yeah, the brooding aristocrats in velvet capes.
Right, the haunted Transylvanian castles. You need to throw that out the window right now.
Completely toss it. We are stripping away all the romance today.
We are looking at the raw, unvarnished data of an evolutionary arms race.
Exactly. When you analyze the sources we have today with actual biological rigor, the narrative it stops being a spooky story.
It becomes the study of an apex predator, literally a hominid engineered to hunt us, hiding in the blind spots of our own history.
Hiding in plain sight, almost. But to even entertain the idea of this paleo-ancient splinter species, we first have to fundamentally question the timeline of humanity itself. Right?
We do. Because if this rival hominid evolved these highly specialized traits, things like nocturnal vision or active camouflage or enzymatic saliva.
That doesn't just happen overnight.
No, not at all. That requires millions of years of evolutionary pressure.
Millions. And the conventional timeline that, we're all taught in school, it simply does not allow enough runway for a second highly advanced hominid to branch off and specialize to that extreme degree.
It really doesn't.
Mm.
But the sources we're analyzing today, they challenge that conventional timeline entirely.
Yeah.
They point to a deeply fractured, much, much older human history.
Which brings us to the archaeological anomalies.
Right. This is where we must examine the really controversial work cataloged by researchers like Michael A. Cremo and Richard L. Thompson.
In their book, Forbidden Archaeology, right?
Yes. And they assert something that makes mainstream academia deeply, deeply uncomfortable.
I bet it does.
They argue that evidence of anatomically modern humans, or at least highly advanced hominids living millions of years ago, has actually been routinely discovered.
But just ignored.
Suppressed, ignored, or conveniently forgotten, yeah. Just because it breaks the accepted models.
And we aren't just talking about, a slightly older bone fragment found in a dusty cave somewhere. The anomalies they present in this dossier are staggering.
They really push the boundaries.
Let's talk about the Nampa figurines, because this blew my mind. So it's 1889 in Nampa, Idaho, and workers are out there drilling an artesian well.
Just a standard industrial drill site.
Right. And they pull up a small baked clay figurine of a human being.
But the context of where they found it is the key.
Exactly. They didn't find it near the surface. It was brought up from a depth of roughly 300 feet.
300 feet down.
And beneath a heavy layer of basalt lava. So, geologically speaking, the stratum it was found in dates back approximately 2 million years.
2 million.
2 million. I mean, mainstream geology and anthropology insist that anatomically modern humans, the kind capable of baking clay into art, they didn't exist 2 million years ago in North America.
Not even close according to the standard model. Therefore, the artifact is almost always dismissed as a hoax, or they claim it was just drilling contamination, that it fell down the hole.
Right. But if you treat it forensically, like this dossier does, as a legitimate piece of data, it implies that the timeline of intelligent life on Earth is not just this straight upward line of progress.
It may be cyclical.
which is a heavy thought.
Yeah.
I do have to express some skepticism here, though,
Sure.
because it's not just baked clay in the sources. The dossier also mentions a coin.
Ah, the Ridge-Long coin.
Yes, discovered in Ridgelawn, Illinois. It was brought up from a depth of 114 feet, from strata dated between 200,000 and 400,000 years old.
And it's the manufacturing of it that's so anomalous.
Right. It wasn't just a stamped piece of primitive metal. It was described as being produced through what appears to be a rolling mill. It had distinct edges and markings.
A machined object.
Yeah. And I'm struggling with that leap, I won't lie. 2 to 400,000 years ago, mainstream science says we barely had controlled fire. We had primitive stone tools. How are we suddenly talking about machined metal?
It is a massive leap. It really is. And the sources go even further than that, referencing machined metallic objects found in coal seams that actually predate the 65-million-year-old dinosaur extinction.
65 million. It's hard to even wrap your head around.
It is. Now, as forensic analysts of this dossier, we do not have to accept these anomalies as absolute, universally proven facts of ancient human industry.
Right. We aren't saying this is 100% gospel.
Exactly.
Right.
But we must treat them as a profound what-if scenario.
Yeah.
What if the concept of a paleo-ancient, very high civilization is accurate?
If intelligent life or, hominid civilizations have risen and fallen over tens of millions of years,
Then the evolutionary tree is infinitely more complex than we assume.
it's not just a single branch growing straight up.
No, it's a dense bush. And that vast oceanic stretch of deep time provides the exact runway necessary for a species to splinter, to adapt to specific harsh environments, and to specialize into entirely different biological niches.
Okay, so if the timeline is actually vast enough to allow for it, let's look at the actual biological blueprint of this human-adjacent blood drinker.
The biology is where it gets truly fascinating.
Because my first thought reading this was the caloric math.
Right, the energy requirements.
Yeah, sustaining a 180-pound humanoid entirely on a liquid blood diet seems biologically impossible. I mean, blood is mostly water.
It lacks the dense, complex carbohydrates and the fats that a large mammal typically needs for energy.
Exactly. So how does a hominid survive on that?
Well, it's a critical question of metabolism and feeding strategy.
Mm-hmm.
And to understand it, we don't look at supernatural myths. We look at Earth's existing biology.
The natural world.
Yes.
Cool.
Look at vampire bats in Latin America.
Mhm.
They feed exclusively on the blood of cattle and birds.
Exclusively.
Exclusively. They possess these razor-sharp incisors to make microscopic incisions, and they lap up the pooling blood. They don't suck it like a straw.
Okay, but bats are tiny. They weigh almost nothing.
True. To scale that up to a hominid, we have to look at the chemistry of parasitism.
Right, the leeches. The dossier highlights specific leech species that attach themselves to hosts, including humans.
And they have a very sophisticated biological toolkit.
They don't just mechanically draw blood. They secrete complex biochemical compounds.
They do. They introduce local anesthetics.
So the host doesn't feel the bite at all.
Precisely. And they introduce vasodilators to increase blood flow to the area.
And most importantly, they secrete these highly specific enzymes like hirudin.
Hirudin, yes. It prevents the host's blood from clotting.
So it just keeps flowing.
It's a very real, very effective evolutionary survival strategy. If a creature can prevent clotting and completely numb the feeding site, it can feed for extended periods without the host's body shutting down the wound.
Or without the host waking up and, smashing it.
Exactly. It's safe feeding.
So it's evolutionary convergence. I mean, if bats and aquatic insects evolve completely separately to survive on blood, and they use the exact same enzymatic strategies, could hominid offshoot have evolved similar traits?
That is the core question of the dossier. Could a branch of our own family tree have developed specialized salivary glands to produce those same anesthetics and anticoagulants?
If their metabolic rate was drastically different from ours, like perhaps much slower, requiring way fewer calories outside of brief bursts of hunting energy, the biological math actually starts to work.
It does. Which brings us to their physical morphology. If a hominid were to actually evolve into a nocturnal parasitic predator, what would it look like?
The dossier has an answer for this, and it is chilling. The source documents synthesize this profile, referring to what human researchers have termed an ABE.
An anomalous biological entity.
Right, and this ABE profile is not just a chaotic mashup of monster parts like you'd see in a movie. It reads as a masterpiece of predatory design.
Let's break down that ABE profile. because as you said, it reads like a clinical field guide.
Yeah, it describes these entities as having an elongated skull, a prominent jaw with fangs, and large red eyes.
Very specific markers.
They are described as having a reptilian appearance, but crucially, and this is a big detail, without a tail.
Which roots them firmly in the hominid family.
Right. And females are noted as having pointed ears and small holes for nostrils. But here is where the evolutionary adaptations become terrifyingly specific.
The camouflage.
Yes. They possess a crest of spines along their back, and the membranes of these spines, along with the fur covering their body, can actively change color to go undetected.
Active camouflage in a hominid.
Wild, right. And furthermore, they have three-fingered, clawed hands and feet, granting them this peculiar agility to climb virtually any surface and run at incredible speeds.
When you analyze those traits forensically and biologically, every single one serves a distinct predatory function.
They aren't random.
No. Let's start with the red eyes. In nature, animals with a tapetum lucidum.
That's the reflective layer in the back of the eye, right?
Exactly, the layer behind the retina that enhances night vision. Animals with that often reflect light in shades of red, yellow, or green.
Like a cat in the headlights.
Right. So red eyes suggest a highly evolved nocturnal vision system, allowing them to see clearly in near total darkness, while perhaps remaining less sensitive to sudden flashes of bright light.
That makes perfect sense. And the elongated skull.
It likely accommodates different sensory organs, perhaps a highly developed olfactory bulb for tracking prey by scent, or enhanced auditory processing for hunting in the dark.
And I mentioned the lack of a tail earlier. That is a huge evolutionary marker.
It really is. It suggests a clear hominid or advanced primate lineage. They aren't relying on a tail for arboreal balancing like a lesser monkey would.
Yet they have these three-fingered, clawed hands and feet. Now, at first glance, reading this, a three-fingered hand seems like a devolution from our, highly dexterous five-fingered hands.
It seems like a step backward.
Yeah, but if you look at a sloth or certain specialized climbing predators, regression in digit count often correlates with a massive increase in pure grip strength.
Precisely. 3 thick digits with heavy claws are hyper-specialized for grappling prey and scaling vertical surfaces. They are not built for delicate tool use.
Right. They don't need to thread a needle. They need to scale a wall. It is a total divergence in evolutionary priorities. I mean, we evolved for tool use and endurance running on the plains. They evolved for stealth, vertical mobility, and ambush.
And speaking of stealth, the most striking adaptation in the profile is the active camouflage. The color-changing fur and membranes.
I really want to emphasize this for you listening because this is where people usually hear it and scream, okay, that's just a supernatural monster. But changing colors for camouflage is a mundane biological reality.
It happens all over the animal kingdom.
Chameleons do it. Cuttlefish and octopuses do it with astonishing speed using chromatophores.
Specialized pigment-containing cells, yes.
If you have an apex predator hunting highly intelligent prey, meaning us, in dark forests or around early human settlements, it needs to be completely undetectable.
Evolving a mammalian version of chromatophores in the skin, or perhaps specialized hair follicles, is an incredible evolutionary leap. But it is firmly grounded in biology.
It doesn't break the laws of physics. If you put this ABE creature in a biology textbook next to a deep-sea anglerfish or a stealth-adapted snow leopard, it fits perfectly.
That is a very crucial distinction. We label them monsters because, for once in our evolutionary history, we are the prey. We are looking at a hominid optimized for stealth.
It's unsettling.
It is. Now, if such a rival species existed, we wouldn't just see them in abstract biological profiles. We would see echoes of them in the deep geographical pockets of human history.
The fossilized memories of our ancestors, basically.
Yes, and the dossier brings us to the harshest environments on Earth to find them, specifically Tibet.
The Denisovan connection. This part of the dossier completely rewired how I view ancient mythology.
It's a fascinating link.
We're looking at Tibetan cryptid lore here, specifically the Srinpo, which in the ancient Sanskrit texts is known as the Rakshasa.
And how are they described?
They are described in the lore as cannibalistic, giant, demonic entities that were said to have ruled the Tibetan plateau prior to the emergence of the first human dynasties.
Ruled before humans. What makes the Srinpo legends so compelling is how they map directly onto recent, very real archaeological discoveries.
Right, because we didn't know about Denisovans until recently.
Exactly. We now know that the Denisovans are robust, early human sibling species, inhabited the high-altitude environments of the Tibetan plateau, tens of thousands of years ago.
And they possessed specific genetic adaptations for high altitude, right? Adaptations that modern Tibetans actually inherited through ancient interbreeding.
Yes, the EPAS1 gene. The text suggests a direct connection between the genetic memory of these real, towering, robust hominids and the mythological legends of the Srinpo.
The dossier highlights this very specific, chilling detail from a Tibetan historical account. It says one of the thigh bones of a Srinpo was so incredibly massive that it was fashioned into a weapon known as the long lance.
A single femur used as a polearm.
Think about the biomechanics of that. A hominid with a femur so large and dense it can be swung as a heavy weapon. That gives you an immediate sense of scale and the terrifying physical power of this rival species.
It forces us to reconsider what early humans were actually fighting against in the dark.
It wasn't just wolves.
No. The sources also mention Silingko, which is the second largest saline lake in Tibet. Its name literally translates to demon lake.
Because something was banished there, right?
Yes, named after a resident entity banished there in the 8th century. The text poses a critical question. Do these legends preserve, in a culturally abstract form, the memory of the former presence of Denisovans, or perhaps heavily adapted Denisovan hybrids?
A rival hominid that we just slowly, over millennia, pushed to the absolute fringes of the earth.
Out of sight, out of mind.
It's the idea that myth is just the fossilized remains of ancient history. We just didn't have the scientific vocabulary back then to describe a divergent hominid, so we called them demons. We called them monsters.
But if this paleo-ancient splinter species was biologically real, we have to ask the hard, operational questions.
How did they feed without wiping us out entirely?
Right. How did they survive the immense stretches of geological time?
And how did early civilizations fight back?
Which brings us to movement 2 of this deep dive. 3 terrifying, historically suppressed theories about their existence and their survival strategies.
Let's get into the first theory because it completely shatters the Hollywood image of the vampire.
It does. Theory 1 posits that this divergent branch was a strictly parasitic offshoot, optimized for stealth and hunger.
We need to completely deconstruct the myth that vampires simply walk up to a victim, bite their neck, and drink their blood.
The neck bite is pure literary invention.
It is, right. It was popularized by 19th century authors to add an element of intimacy, romance, and dramatic flair to the monster.
It looks good on stage.
Yeah.
It's terribly inefficient in biology.
Right. But the global evidence from our sources paints a picture of highly specialized parasitic feeding methods that are biologically sound and, frankly, way more deeply disturbing than a neck bite.
Real parasitism in nature is rarely dramatic. Its success relies entirely on going completely unnoticed.
Because a true parasite, biologically speaking, evolves to feed without immediately killing its host.
Exactly. If a predator kills the host every single time it feeds, it rapidly depletes its own localized food supply.
And it alerts everyone else.
Yes, it alerts the surrounding population to its presence, triggering a defensive extermination. The dossier provides global examples from folklore that are astonishingly consistent in describing localized, non-lethal, parasitic feeding.
Okay, let's look at the aswang of the Philippines from the dossier. When you read the ancient descriptions of this thing, it's pure biological horror.
It really is.
It is often described as a dragon-like or reptilian creature, which immediately echoes our ABE profile with the reptilian skin and spines. But look at how it feeds. It doesn't rip out throats.
No, it subsists on sweat and reproductive fluids from sleeping humans.
And the way it gets them. It extracts this using a long, hollow, tubular tongue. It lowers this tongue between the gaps in the palm leaf roofs of forest dwellings.
It doesn't even need to enter the physical space of the host.
From an evolutionary perspective, that hollow tongue is acting as a specialized proboscis, much like a mosquito's or a butterfly's.
Exactly. It allows the creature to extract essential biological fluids, which, remember, are rich in salts, trace minerals, and proteins, while remaining completely concealed on the roof.
The host never even wakes up. They just feel fatigued the next day. They think they slept poorly.
And the geographic consistency of these bizarre methods is what's truly compelling. The sources mention the Vietnamese vampire, too.
Oh, this one is so weird. The local legends describe it as a bodiless human head with long antennae extending from the nose.
Now, obviously, a floating bodiless head is biologically impossible.
Right, that's the mythic distortion. But look past the distortion to the mechanism. The legend says it gently strokes the legs of a sleeping person with these antennae, which draws up the sweat on which it subsists. And it can even stimulate the human glands to produce more sweat.
It is effectively farming the host's biology.
Which which is terrifying.
It is. If a hominid evolved highly sensitive, elongated tactile organs, perhaps misinterpreted by terrified locals as antennae that could stimulate sweat glands without waking the host, it is harvesting resources with absolutely zero risk of conflict.
We see a variation of the stealth feeding in South Africa, too, with the tikolosh.
Right, described as a small, ape-like hominid.
Yeah, that climbs onto beds to drink fluids from the soles and ankles of the sleeper's feet, which are the areas with the highest concentration of sweat glands.
It's all about non-lethal extraction.
But the most bizarre biological leap in this section of the dossier is from South America.
The fungal accounts.
Yes. The sources detail accounts of entities that resemble a huge ball of fungus that wraps around the feet of a sleeper in the jungle. It leaches energy and moisture through osmosis, just like a parasitic plant. And before the sleeper wakes up, it shrivels up and retreats rapidly into the dense brush.
It sounds like science fiction.
Now, wait. How does a complex hominid devolve into a fungal ball? I mean, that stretches the biological framework to the breaking point for me.
It does if you take the description literally as a plant. But remember, we're dealing with eyewitness accounts from terrified people waking up in the pitch dark.
Right.
What they likely saw was not literal fungus, but the creature's specialized feeding posture.
Oh, interesting.
Imagine a hominid that wraps itself entirely around the lower extremities of a host,
Well,
using a biological feeding sac, or specialized highly porous skin membranes to draw out moisture and salts through osmotic pressure.
wow.
When startled, it rapidly retracts those membranes, appearing to shrivel, and uses its massive agility to vanish into the trees.
So what early humans interpreted as this magical, shape-shifting fungus was actually just a highly specialized parasitic attachment mechanism.
An evolutionary arms race of stealth feeding.
But the dossier doesn't just leave this in the ancient, unrecorded past. It brings this parasitic drive right into the modern era. It investigates what it calls sanguinarians and psychic vampires.
Yes, the modern psychological component.
The sources introduce an individual named Chris, who identifies as a psychic vampire. And she states that she must feed on emotional energy. Not for psychological thrill or because it's edgy, but out of absolute debilitating biological necessity.
Her testimony in the dossier is incredibly clinical. It doesn't sound like someone playing a game.
No, she says, quote, "For us, there is no pill, no therapy, no treatment except to feed and to continue to feed. Few people understand that our need is like the need for food."
The concept of a psychic vampire is almost universally dismissed by modern medicine as a psychological delusion or maybe a personality disorder.
Right, attention-seeking behavior.
But the text frames it as a potential modern evolution of this exact parasitic trait.
Because if the ancient physical versions of the species fed on sweat, raw plasma, or localized physical energy, could a highly evolved modern descendant have adapted to feed on emotional or neuroelectrical energy?
It's an incredible hypothesis.
I mean, human emotions, fear, stress, extreme arousal, they're just massive dumps of cortisol, adrenaline, and neuroelectrical activity. Is it possible a predator evolved a sensory mechanism to absorb or feed off those specific biochemical spikes just by being in a host's proximity?
It enters the realm of theoretical biology, certainly. But as the text references from Dan Simmons' novel Carrion Comfort,
Oh, I love that book.
it's a great reference point. The idea of mind vampires manipulating and feeding on human neuroenergy represents the ultimate stealth parasite. While Simmons' work is fiction, the real-world subculture of sanguinarians, thousands of individuals who experience severe physiological withdrawal symptoms if they do not consume blood or proximity energy.
Right, they get physically ill.
Yes, it suggests that the deep biological drive for parasitic feeding may still exist in some latent, perhaps genetically hybridized form within the human population today.
That is deeply unsettling. Just the idea that the parasite is still here, walking among us, just feeding differently.
Feeding invisibly.
So if we accept this creature as a biological reality, we have to tackle the biggest myth of all, which brings us to theory number 2.
Immortality.
Immortality, because in every story, every movie, vampires are the undead. They live forever. But our sealed dossier suggests that this perceived immortality is actually a profound physiological trick.
It's not magic.
It's not. It's biological stasis, a severely slowed metabolic decay.
True biological immortality, meaning the complete cessation of cellular aging, is a virtual impossibility for a complex mammal.
Right. Entropy always wins.
Always. But suspended animation, extreme metabolic suppression, or torpor is widely documented in nature.
Bears do it during hibernation.
Yes. Certain frogs freeze completely solid and revive months later. Lungfish encase themselves in dry mud for years. The medical reality provided in our sources points directly to a human condition called catalepsy as the foundation for the immortality myth.
I need to define catalepsy for you listening because it is genuine nightmare fuel.
It really is.
In a cataleptic state, a person's central nervous system essentially locks down. Their body becomes completely rigidly stiff. Their pulse and breathing slow down to levels that are almost undetectable to the naked ear or a casual visual check.
To an uneducated observer or even a 19th century doctor, they appear stone dead.
Yet, horrifyingly, their brain is fully active. They are completely awake and aware, trapped inside their own paralyzed body.
Before the advent of modern electrocardiograms and precise neurological monitoring, catalepsy was a frequent fatal misdiagnosis.
In eras where bodies had to be buried rapidly, especially during plagues, cholera outbreaks, or just intense summer heat premature burial due to cataleptic episodes, was a tragic, very real occurrence.
The dossier tells a specific story from London in 1895 that perfectly illustrates this horror.
Yes, this part was awful to read. A young boy was found lying completely motionless on the grass in a city park. He didn't appear to be breathing at all. His body was stiff and cold to the touch.
The attending doctors pronounced him dead on the spot.
And he was transported straight to the city morgue. The text explicitly notes that he was fully aware the entire time.
He felt everything.
He felt himself being lifted into the carriage, heard the doctors declare him dead, and lay trapped on a cold steel table just waiting to be processed for burial.
He only survived because, through sheer biological luck, his body began to show visible signs of life just moments before the morticians began their invasive work.
Imagine the psychological toll of that. Now, transpose that medical reality onto ancient rural populations in Eastern Europe. People who awoke underground inside wooden coffins, they would naturally panic.
Absolute terror.
They would scratch desperately at the lids, tearing their fingernails, bloodying their hands and faces in the dark, ultimately suffocating. When those specific graves were later exhumed, perhaps to make room for new bodies, or due to a lingering suspicion by the family, the locals found a corpse covered in fresh blood, twisted in unnatural positions.
The only logical conclusion to a pre-scientific mind was that the corpse had risen to feed.
But the illusion of the undead goes even deeper than premature burial, right?
It does. We have to look at the natural, albeit grotesque, mechanics of a rotting body.
The dossier brings in the research of anthropologist Paul Barber here. He wrote extensively on the reality of decomposition. And his work completely strips the supernatural magic away from the vampire myth.
It's pure forensic pathology.
When rural villagers dug up suspected vampires, they were often terrified because it looked like the corpse's hair, fingernails, and teeth had actually grown in the grave. And to them, that's undeniable proof of life after death, right?
It seems like proof, absolutely. But forensic science tells a completely different, purely mechanical story.
Barber explains that the primary driver of early decomposition is severe dehydration. As the body loses massive amounts of water, the skin shrinks. It dries out and pulls back tightly against the bone structure.
The hair and nails haven't grown a single millimeter.
Right. Rather, the skin around them has dramatically receded, exposing more of the hair follicle and the nail bed, making them appear significantly longer.
It's an optical illusion.
And it's exactly the same with the teeth. We have this classic image of the grinning, fanged vampire skull. But it's just the gums dehydrating and shrinking back toward the root of the tooth. It makes the teeth look incredibly long and prominent, creating the illusion of predatory fangs.
The dossier also mentions a highly documented historical case from 1722 in northern Romania that adds another layer to this.
Oh, the staking.
Yes, a local vampire hunter ordered the exhumation of a suspected vampire. When they opened the coffin, they drove a wooden stake through the corpse's chest. And according to the historical record, a massive spurt of fresh-looking blood shot out of the mouth.
And the crowd panicked, taking this as absolute, undeniable proof that the vampire had recently been out feeding on the living.
But the text explains the gross anatomy of what actually happened. When a body breaks down, the internal organs liquefy. Massive amounts of decomposition gases, like methane and hydrogen sulfide, build up in the thoracic and abdominal cavities.
The torso inflates like a balloon.
Exactly. When you forcefully drive a wooden stake into that highly pressurized cavity, you are essentially puncturing a pneumatic pump.
Those trap gases violently force out whatever liquefied biological material is left in the lungs and stomach, including the dead person's own dark, decomposing blood.
Right up through the trachea and out the mouth. It looks exactly like a monster vomiting up its recent meal.
It's just physics and biology, and we can also add to this the medical reality of porphyria, which the sources also cite.
Yes, a rare genetic blood disorder affecting the synthesis of heme. Sufferers can experience severe, blistering sensitivity to the sunlight, receding gums that expose the teeth, and skin lesions that scar terribly.
When you combine the visual markers of porphyria, the horrific reality of cataleptic premature burial, and the natural pressurized mechanics of decomposition, you have a perfect storm of medical realities.
Superstitious populations observed these completely natural phenomena and mathematically concluded that supernatural monsters were real.
But I want to introduce a biological analogy here, tying this back to our ABE profile. Because what if it wasn't purely human misinterpretation?
What if it was functional?
Yeah. What if this rival hominid species could purposefully enter a cataleptic stasis? Think of it like a terrifying form of extreme hibernation.
That's a fascinating leap.
If they faced widespread famine, an era of extreme weather, or intense hunting pressure from early humans, what if they evolved the ability to drastically slow their heart rate, become rigid, and appear biologically dead?
They bury themselves in deep caves, or they allow themselves to be buried, and they simply wait out the century.
Right. If this species was cold-blooded or possessed a reptilian metabolism, as the ABE profile hints with its explicitly reptilian appearance, entering a profound state of torpor to survive harsh conditions would be a highly advantageous evolutionary trait.
They wouldn't be immortal. They would just be incredibly long-lived, stretching their lifespan over thousands of years through prolonged periods of extreme biological stasis.
Okay, so if we accept that early humans were sharing the environment with this parasitic predator that could camouflage itself, climb any surface, and enter biological stasis to survive famine, how did we deal with them?
We fought back.
Did we just huddle around the fire and hope they didn't come down from the trees?
No, we went to war.
Which leads us to theory 3. Ancient civilizations fought silent wars against them. And the dossier makes it clear. This wasn't about frightened villagers with pitchforks. This is about large-scale, coordinated, ancient warfare.
We have to look at the archaeological anomalies presented in the text regarding ancient conflicts. The dossier specifically references the ancient, protracted warfare in North America between two distinct morphological groups.
On one side, you have the dolichocephalic populations, and we should define that for you listening. Dolichocephalic refers to populations with unusually long, narrow skulls.
Yes.
The text describes them as the forest savages, referencing early indigenous groups like the Algonquian and Huron-Iroquois linguistic families.
Correct. And on the other side of this conflict were the brachycephalic populations, meaning broad or round-skulled people, known archaeologically as the mound builders.
The mound builders constructed incredibly elaborate, massive, curious geometrical earthworks and forts throughout the Ohio Valley and the broader American Midwest.
Now, mainstream archaeology typically views these mounds as ceremonial sites or standard defensive positions against other human tribes.
But the text specifically notes that the scale and specific geometric design of these forts prove the extreme, unusual dangers the mound builders were exposed to. We have to ask, were these massive, mathematically precise palisades built just to keep out a rival human tribe armed with spears?
Or were they built for something else?
Exactly. If we look back at our ABE profile creatures with three-fingered claws that can effortlessly scale vertical surfaces, creatures with active camouflage that hunt primarily in the dark, were these forts designed differently?
It completely forces us to reevaluate ancient defensive architecture. If your enemy is a rival human, a high wooden wall is usually sufficient.
Where humans can't easily jump a 20-foot log wall.
But if your enemy can climb straight up a vertical wall and turn virtually invisible in the dark forest canopy, a standard wall is useless.
It's just a mild inconvenience.
You need geometric palisades. You need starfort designs with overlapping fields of view, ensuring there are absolutely zero blind spots or shadows where a climbing predator could hide.
You need cleared sightlines designed specifically to secure shelter against a highly mobile, nocturnal species.
The text frames this not as tribal skirmishes, but as a war of extermination.
A genocidal war against a rival evolutionary branch. It's incredibly dark to think about early humanity dedicating massive resources just to secure a safe place to sleep at night.
And this concept of a war against predators isn't isolated to North America either.
No, the dossier points to the Sumerian and ancient Hellenic textual traditions as well. These foundational texts of Western civilization explicitly speak of protracted wars with giants and monsters in high antiquity.
Modern historians read those texts as allegories for conquering nature, or maybe defeating rival, lesser-developed tribes.
But the dossier suggests we should read them literally.
Yes, these might not be mythological metaphors, but rather the dim, institutional memories of coordinated military action, an intentional cross-cultural agenda for the genocidal extinction of a certain engineered race.
Or a heavily adapted species of rival hominids. And what's truly terrifying is that this war didn't just stay in high antiquity. The memory of it, the absolute dread of these creatures, carried forward into recorded history.
It became embedded in our public health responses.
The dossier brings us to a forensic excavation in the spring of 2009 in Venice, Italy, specifically on the island of Lazaretto Nuovo.
A fascinating dig site.
Researchers were excavating a massive plague pit, a mass grave for victims of a horrific 16th century epidemic.
During a plague of that magnitude, the death toll was so catastrophic that standard burial rites were abandoned entirely. Bodies were hastily thrown into communal pits and covered with lime and dirt to suppress the miasma.
But amidst the chaos of this mass grave, archaeologists found something highly specific, something intentional, that proves the ancient war, or at least the psychological terror of it, was still actively being fought.
They unearthed the skeletal remains of a woman with a large brick forcibly, intentionally lodged between her jaws.
The force used was so great it actually broke her teeth.
This is widely considered by the scientific community as the first archaeological reconstruction of a vampire exorcism.
We have to understand the specific epidemiological paranoia of the 16th century here. The belief at the time was that suspected vampires were actually shroud eaters.
Shroud eaters, yes.
During a plague, a body buried hastily would decompose, purge fluids, and the shroud covering the face would sag into the mouth, often deteriorating due to acidic bodily fluids.
When gravediggers reopened pits to add more bodies, they saw corpses with bloody shrouds seemingly chewed through.
And they deduced that these entities were remaining alive in the grave by magically consuming their shrouds. And in doing so, they were actively generating and spreading the plague upwards to the living.
By physically lodging a heavy brick into the jaw of the corpse, they were mechanically neutralizing the perceived threat.
They were ensuring the jaw could not close, the creature could not eat the shroud, and the biological vector of the disease was stopped. As the anthropologist quoted in the text says, this helps authenticate how the myth of vampires was born.
They didn't understand microbes or fleas. They literally pinned the spread of biological disease on the remnants of this ancient predatory species.
If we synthesize all this data, the brick violently forced into the mouth, the massive wooden stakes driven into the thoracic cavity to deflate gases, the elaborate, mathematically precise geometric forts of the mound builders, what becomes undeniably clear is that these aren't just quaint, ignorant superstitions.
No, they are ancient combat and quarantine protocols, rigorously encoded into global folklore.
I love how you phrased that earlier when we were prepping. Combat and quarantine protocols. Humanity was passing down survival manuals, but because they lacked a scientific vocabulary, they disguised them as fairy tales.
If you see a corpse that looks like this, put a brick in its mouth. If you hear this sound in the dark, build a geometric palisade.
It is the institutional genetic memory of a prey species desperately trying to survive its apex predator.
Which brings us to the profound final movement of our investigation. Movement 3, the mythic psychology.
We have dissected the anomalous archaeology, the theoretical biology, and the historical warfare. But if we accept that these predatory hominids existed and that we fought a brutal war of extermination against them, what do they represent in the human psyche today?
Why in the 21st century are we still so deeply culturally obsessed with them?
To understand that, the dossier insists we have to look inward, at the shadow of our own human biology. There's a brilliant, highly evocative quote in the sources that describes vampires as the crystallized terrors of our forebears, coalesced into one menacing shadow that has followed humanity through the ages.
They represent a deep, inescapable psychological dichotomy within us.
The text highlights the intense, complex relationship between Eros, the drive for life, love, and sexuality, and Thanatos, the drive toward death and self-destruction. The vampire archetype perfectly embodies both.
It does. Because even as you logically understand that a vampire can only survive by drawing your blood, by literally consuming your life essence and killing you, it is that very intimate physical act of consumption that draws you in.
It's Bram Stoker's ultimate concept of the undead. The entity holds out the tantalizing promise of eternal life, of escaping the natural decay of time, but it offers it at a terrible parasitic price.
It is the ultimate toxic symbiosis. It is the seduction of the predator.
But the dossier unearths another layer to this psychology that is far more disturbing than a simple predator-prey dynamic.
To grasp it, we must explore the ancient Chinese concept of the qiangxi.
In this specific tradition, the transformation into a vampire is not the result of an external infection. It's not a bite that turns you. They believed that every single human being inherently possesses the capability to become a qiangxi.
Yes, this part fundamentally shifted my perspective on the lore. The ancient Chinese belief states that every person has two distinct parts to their soul. One of those parts is the hun, the rational higher self.
But the other part is primal. This raises a terrifying question for you, the listener, right now. Does this mean the vampire isn't an external monster that comes out of the dark woods to get you? Is it instead the dark predatory potential lying perfectly dormant within your own DNA?
It is a staggering philosophical premise. It suggests that vampirism is a latency within the human condition itself.
It represents a primal selfishness, the ultimate biological narcissism, the willingness to physically consume the life, energy, and future of another human being merely to sustain your own existence.
If humanity did splinter from a common ancestor millions of years ago, as the Cremo and Thompson anomalies suggest, perhaps we carry the genetic ghost of that predatory sibling deep within our own genome.
We are the species that chose cooperation and community, but we still carry the biological hardware of the predator we evolved away from. We carry the ghost of the predator inside us.
And how do we deal with that terrifying mythic memory today? How do we cope with the subconscious realization that we were once hunted, or that we harbor the capacity to hunt our own?
We sanitize it.
Yes.
The dossier explicitly calls out this cultural phenomenon. We took the crystallized, blood-soaked terrors of our ancestors, the physically adapted ABEs, the towering Denisovan giants, the parasitic, disease-spreading shroud eaters, and we neutered them.
We turned them into gaunt, sophisticated aristocrats in ruined, romantic Transylvanian castles.
We turned them into brooding, hormone-challenged teenagers dwelling in high schools, pining over human girls, like we see in cultural juggernauts like Twilight or Interview with the Vampire or True Blood.
We took the apex predator that forced our ancestors to build geometric forts, and we made it sexy.
We made it understandable. Safe, almost.
We sanitized them because the alternative reality is simply too horrifying for a modern mind to accept. We sit very comfortably at the top of the food chain today.
You are likely sitting in a well-lit room right now, scrolling on a highly advanced piece of technology, living in a climate-controlled city. You feel safe.
But our collective subconscious, our deepest genetic memory, remembers a time when we were absolutely not the apex predator. We remember a time when the night belonged entirely to a sibling species that hunted us with impunity.
By turning them into romantic, tragic anti-heroes in our media, we conquer the fear. We domesticate the ancient nightmare.
We domesticate the nightmare. That is exactly what we do.
So let's pull back and briefly recap this incredibly dense, unnerving journey we've been on through this suppressed dossier. We started by questioning the very timeline of humanity, looking at anomalous archaeology, 2-million-year-old figurines and 200,000-year-old machined coins,
Suggesting a vastly older human history that allowed for deep evolutionary splintering.
We then rigorously examined the biological blueprint of a predator. We looked at how color-changing fur, three-fingered claws, and red eyes are not supernatural, but highly specialized adaptations for a nocturnal parasitic hominid offshoot.
We explored the terrifying medical realities of catalepsy and the mechanical processes of decomposition that created the illusion of immortality in the undead.
We discussed the ancient geometric wars fought by the mound builders and the frantic quarantine exorcisms of the Lazaretto Nuovo plague victims, all representing humanity's desperate fight against these predators.
And finally, we looked at how we've psychologically sanitized this profound trauma into pop culture romance.
It has been a comprehensive reevaluation of human history. It demands that we look at the dark, unexplored spaces in our evolutionary tree, not with ignorant superstition, but with cold biological and anthropological rigor.
Absolutely.
And as we close this dossier, I want to leave you with one final, deeply provocative thought hidden at the very end of our sources. We talked about how these creatures might have survived ancient extermination by adapting and entering stasis.
Yes.
Well, the data notes a fascinating sociological study by vampire researcher Michelle Bellinger. In 2008, she documented that more than 1,000 people living in New York City alone openly described themselves as actual practicing vampires.
Now, the easy, rational explanation is that they are just part of a fringe subculture engaging in psychological roleplay.
Right. But if we apply the evolutionary logic we've discussed today, if this divergent human offshoot evolved over millions of years to be the absolute masters of stealth, active camouflage, and social integration, what if the ancient war of extermination never actually ended?
What if they didn't die out?
Think about it. A modern metropolis isn't a concrete jungle. It's a high-density feedlot. It is an environment packed with millions of isolated, perfectly insulated hunting blinds.
If you are a specialized parasite that feeds on biological fluids or neuroelectrical energy, a city like New York is an all-you-can-eat buffet where people willingly lock themselves in small, dark boxes every single night.
A species biologically designed to go undetected would find a modern city of millions to be the most perfect, most secure hunting ground in the history of the planet.
Just something to think about the next time you're walking home alone at night.
Yeah, and you notice a shadow moving just a little too fast in the alleyway. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the dark edges of our history, because sometimes that muddy diagnostic water is hiding an evolutionary reality right beneath the surface.